good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Navdeep Suri. I am Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi, and we are partnering with the Doha Forum for this very interesting session titled Perilous Waters, Peace and Prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. We have a wonderful panel with us today. Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, Dr. Muhammad Malki, the Minister in Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for Education and Second Minister for Foreign Affairs in Singapore, Dato Kamarudin Jaffar, the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs from Malaysia, Dr. Hyung Chong Kim, President of the Korean Institute for International Economic Policy, and of course, Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. Let me just start off with a couple of comments. Much is being spoken about the Indo-Pacific. It is a vital part of the world, accounts for half the world's population, 60% of the world's trade, GDP, 68% of the growth in the global economy comes from the Indo-Pacific. It's a young part of the world. 58% of the world's youth are in the Indo-Pacific. So clearly what happens in this region is going to matter, not just today, but in the coming years as well. It's a region that lies at the very heart of supply chains. It's a region that is beginning to see some fairly vibrant rivalry between the major powers. And there are genuine concerns within the region on how are we going to manage a point of time where geopolitics and geo-economics are both coming to a head. The geopolitics in terms of big power rivalry, the geo-economics not just in terms of the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and what it's going to do, but also in the manner in which supply chains have been disrupted during the course of the pandemic. So we have an exceptional panel to navigate the perilous waters of the Indo-Pacific. And I'm going to start with Minister Marsudi. Minister, you've been at the center of crafting the ASEAN document, the ASEAN Outlook for the Indo-Pacific. And in the document, when I was going through it, it says that ASEAN hopes to be an honest broker in major power rivalries. And you see the Indo-Pacific as an integrated space. I wanted to ask you, how do you be the honest broker as Indonesia, as ASEAN, at a time when the shadow of Ukraine is traveling all the way into the Indo-Pacific? We have seen some fairly stern messaging emanating out of Washington and elsewhere. Taiwan seems to be back into the focus. There's a lot going on. And how does your ASEAN Outlook strategy play into this?
Well, thank you very much, Navdeep. Let me start by sharing, you mentioned about Ukraine, so I have to share my worries on the global situation today, particularly in Ukraine, that has turned into a humanitarian disaster. And we see, if we are honest to ourselves, we see so many uncertainties, trust deficit, zero-sum game, exclusivism, and action inconsistent with the international law. So such challenges can also be found in the Indo-Pacific, of course. You mentioned, Navdeep, that Indo-Pacific with all your data means that the Indo-Pacific is a strategic region with abundant potential, of course, and we have to understand also that we can only reap this potential if peace and stability are in place. And we all know that peace and stability doesn't fall from the sky. They must be created, they must be nurtured, and the international law must be upheld as the rule of the game. So any minilateral and plurilateral groupings, because on your documents you mentioned about the minilateral groupings, should be used as building block to attain peace and prosperity. So against this backdrop, back to the concept of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN adopted the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and at least there are 3 issues that ASEAN would like to achieve. First, build positive paradigm. The outlook seeks to develop a mindset of dialogue and collaboration, win-win cooperation, and nurturing strategic trust. These are key traits to nurture trust and confidence. And then second, on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, we focus on the concrete cooperation, and ASEAN offers 4 priorities of cooperation. 1 is on the maritime, 2nd is on the connectivity, 3rd, the attainment of SDGs, and 4, trade and investment. The 3rd point that ASEAN would like to have is promote inclusive regional architecture. ASEAN wants to ensure that inclusivity and spirit of collaboration shape our interaction in the Indo-Pacific. This is in contrast with post-war security architecture in many areas that are steeped in containment and alienation. And risk escalating tension becomes even further. So we believe that common security, common stability, and common prosperity is a public good. So I'll stop on that. Thank you very much.
So yes, it is a public good. I guess the challenge is how to expand or enhance that public good. But Dr. Maliki, there's an African proverb: when 2 elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And in this case, the grass suspiciously looks like smaller countries like Singapore, whose trade and whose prosperity depends on international trade, on freedom of navigation, on maritime security. I've heard several of your leaders speak with great eloquence about the imperative of a rules-based global order, because you need those rules to protect the prosperity. Now, tell me what happens when one country chooses to ignore that rule. It makes outrageous claims on territorial basis. The smaller country goes to the arbitration court in Hague, gets a unanimous verdict in its favor, and nothing happens. So what happens to rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific? It's great to speak about the ASEAN centrality in addressing the issues, but what has ASEAN done on this?
Well, I think first and foremost, we cannot accept any action by any countries that violates the whole notion of international independence of the country, territorial integrity, sovereignty. Cannot. So as a global community, we must be very clear in that position, especially for smaller countries like Singapore. And in ASEAN, I mean, we talk so much about the Indo-Pacific, we talk so much about major powers, and we talk about major powers really. First and foremost is looking at the relationship between China and the US. And this is really one of the most consequential bilateral relationships in the world today, and how that relationship evolves will inevitably impact on the Indo-Pacific, and both countries have got significant interests. And I think what's important is for us to ensure that both countries understand that we are looking at the trajectory of the relationship. It's quite worrying to look at how issues like distrust, rivalry begins to be intensified. Even locally, you see public sentiments in both countries towards each other beginning to be heightened, but it doesn't mean that peace and prosperity in Indo-Pacific cannot be attained. We see that both countries continue to have strong, high-level interaction. The recent meeting between President Xi and President Biden is indicative that I think neither want outright conflict. And so what's important is open communication between the two major powers, looking for ways that can diffuse tension, build mutual trust, work out modus vivendi, where cooperation and competition can actually coexist. And I think that's important. And from the perspective of small countries like Singapore, we welcome, yet at the same time, we are clear of our own position. We stand guided by our longer-term interests. We are not afraid to disagree when necessary, even if it means that it may cause unhappiness. But I think we believe that it will ensure our own credibility and trustworthiness. So I think when we look at what's happening around the world, what's important is for the world to be clear of what it means to respect international law, what it means for us to respect individual territorial integrity and independence of countries. And for ASEAN, ASEAN continues to be, we see ASEAN as an inclusive regional platform. Even as we expand, we want to ensure that it is vital and that ASEAN engage whoever that comes and wants to engage ASEAN, engage us collectively. And you spoke about the centrality of ASEAN. There are many regional groups that want to come and engage ASEAN, whether it is the Quad, whether it is AUKUS. And I think it is important, and it reflects the importance of ASEAN as the central mechanism for us to engage in the Indo-Pacific. But I think the natural question really is whether such groupings help or hinder our efforts towards peace and prosperity in the region.
So let me take it forward from there, Dato Kamarudin. Maritime security is vital for Malaysia, for other countries in the region. You've also been, in a sense, at the receiving end of some unilateral actions. Last year, the Malaysian airspace was buzzed by 16 Chinese aircraft at a go. And I believe you registered a strong protest. There's the minor matter of a large gas field which is being contested off your shores. Indonesia often finds itself in a spot on fishing rights, which are being historically exercised according to the Chinese. When you talk of ASEAN centrality in this context, but within ASEAN, there is no consensus, and you clearly have different points of view within ASEAN on how to deal with or respond to this situation. What does Malaysia do in terms of asserting its own national positions, its own sovereignty, and trying to build the ASEAN consensus on this?
Thank you, Ambassador Navdeed. First of all, let me thank the Kuwait, the Qatar Investment Authority for organizing this and for the opportunity for me to be together in this forum. Yes, as we are all aware, Southeast Asian leaders over the last 50 years have already decided that as maritime nations, the countries of Southeast Asia, except for Laos, we have to work together. Southeast Asian countries benefit from the significant reserves of oil and gas, for instance, on our waters, in our waters. Southeast Asian countries, due to our position, have been the important sea routes between the Western economies and the economies of China, Japan, South Korea, and so forth. For that reason, Singapore has become one of the busiest seaports in the world. Through all this, we have decided more than 50 years ago that Southeast Asian countries must work together, must cooperate, must, as far as possible, have strong common positions. And for that reason, ASEAN, Association of Asian, Southeast Asian Countries, was formed. And not enough for this, it was made very clear way back in the early 70s that we have to declare the region as a region of peace, as a region of neutrality, as a region of freedom. For that reason, the document ZOPFAN, Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, was promulgated and agreed to by all the ASEAN leaders during the early 70s. Apart from that, there were few other documents whereby ASEAN leaders have agreed that the zone should be a nuclear-free zone. And because of that, another treaty was formed. Not enough for that, a new treaty called Treaty of Amity and all those were again agreed to by ASEAN leaders. So the point I'm saying is that in order to protect our joint maritime interests from being disturbed or from being not respected by other countries, especially the superpowers, the only way is for our region to work together and to, in order for that to voice together our disagreement with any violations of our territorial integrity by any power. So for that also, the ASEAN has at least 2 documents or 2 agreements, which in general is called the Code of Conduct, in order for ASEAN together to counter and to have a mutually respected avenue for discussion, for negotiation, for mediation on issues like claims, violations into our seas. And this, I think, we have managed to conduct fairly well. I'm not denying completely that it still happened, but when such violations happen, what as an individual independent country Malaysia could do in cases that Navdeep mentioned was to, of course, issue protest notes, was, of course, to summon ambassadors to note our protest and disagreement with what has been done to us. So this will continue to happen, and for this reason, ASEAN needs to be more consolidated. I will agree that we should be more forceful together to make our disagreement to any violations of our territorial integrity being violated again and again. We have to keep doing this, and it seems to be the way forward together in terms of our group against outside groups in our part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, yesterday, Senator Lindsey Graham, who's never once one to mince words, said something very interesting in the session that he did in the plenary. He said America could be a better friend and perhaps a more resolute adversary. He was speaking in the context of the Middle East. He spoke about the Houthis and so on. But some of what he said also is going to apply in the Indo-Pacific. And I say this because when the Biden administration assumed charge, one of the earliest announcements was that they would have a very strong pivot to the Indo-Pacific. President Biden, I think within weeks, hosted the first virtual Quad summit, followed by an in-person summit, even though COVID was going on. And there was this real reiteration of a commitment that this is where the US administration is going to be focused. Last 1 month, all we hear is Russia and Ukraine. Do you see America getting distracted from its strategic focus on the Indo-Pacific? Can it do both? Or as the old American saying goes, can they walk and chew gum at the same time? And can they uphold Senator Graham's advice of being better friends, particularly as the situation in Taiwan and so on develops?
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Suri, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel with such a distinguished group of people. And the short answer is we have to be able to walk and chew gum. We simply don't have the luxury of being able to choose regions where we're going to focus on, particularly when there are challenges coming from aggressive behavior of countries. So I think the fact that the Biden administration released its Indo-Pacific strategy on February 11th, just about 2 weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, demonstrates that the administration continues to see the Indo-Pacific region as the long-term priority and meeting the challenges of a rising China, competing effectively with China, that these continue to be the long-term priorities of the administration. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in December that China's military is on pace to become a peer competitor of the United States. So we simply can't afford to not focus on the Indo-Pacific region and compete effectively there. But I think you're right that the U.S. needs to show that it is a good friend, a reliable friend, and I think the Indo-Pacific strategy seeks to do that. It puts forward a very affirmative U.S. agenda with the goal of sustaining a free, open, inclusive, transparent order in the Indo-Pacific. It makes clear that the U.S. Sees the region as vital, that American interests in the region are crucial, and that it will work closely with its allies and partners for furthering stability and prosperity in the region. I think that comes through in the Indo-Pacific strategy. And as was mentioned, one of the key lines of effort is strengthening the Quad. And this is, of course, the U.S. grouping of U.S., India, Australia, and Japan. And I think that, initially there was some skepticism from the ASEAN countries about the Quad. Would the Quad displace ASEAN as the focal point for regional architecture in the region? But I think the ASEAN and the Quad serve different purposes, and they kind of need each other, the two organizations. And so I think it's crucial to have the Quad operating effectively, providing public goods to the region, like the vaccination effort that has been so effective in Southeast Asia. So I really see them as complementary organizations, not competing organizations. But yeah, coming back to the original point that we can't choose where we're going to face down aggression. If there is aggression, the U.S. needs to work with its partners in that region. The aggression that we're seeing from Russia against Ukraine, we need to work closely with our European partners. And if we see challenges coming from China, like we have, we've seen the increasingly aggressive activities toward Taiwan. We saw aggression on India's border with China in 2020, the Gawan border crisis. We have seen the maritime aggression that's already been referred to. So we need to work more closely with our allies and partners in Asia to meet those challenges. If we want to preserve the rules-based order that we are talking about. And just the last point, I think that, we saw on February 4th the release of the China-Russia joint statement, which seems to be the most significant statement between the two countries in several decades. So it's something worth paying attention to. But I think that China likely has some mixed opinions about Russia's war in Ukraine. all eyes are looking at what is China going to do? Is it going to bail Russia out financially? Is it going to provide military equipment that Russia is requesting? And I think, China has difficult decisions on its hands. On the one hand, it may, like having the U.S. bogged down in Europe and not focusing or, trying to see the U.S. not focus on the Indo-Pacific. It may want to see Russia increasingly dependent on China. But on the other hand, China's concerned about its own domestic stability, maintaining economic growth, wants to avoid secondary sanctions hitting China. And it also sees that the longer the crisis prolongs, the more cohesive the United States and Europe are getting. And if China bails Russia out of its economic problems, the European countries will be more loath to work with China in the future. So, there are a lot of competing calculations that China must make. But I think in terms of the Indo-Pacific, that is the long-term challenge from the United States perspective.
So, Washington's famous focus on the issue du jour, you say it's not that they will only focus on Ukraine for now, but that the longer-term focus will continue. We started this conversation with a deliberate focus on the security aspect of the Indo-Pacific, because in a sense that security is so critical for peace and prosperity in the region. We have an eminent economist with us on the panel, so I wanted to take this to Dr. Kim from perhaps a different perspective. During the pandemic, one of the things that we collectively realized was an overdependence of global supply chains on one country. And the impact that we saw around the world, I can tell you in India, which is a major manufacturer of pharmaceuticals, suddenly the APIs for key antibiotics were not available. I think this year, automobile production is going to be down maybe 10 to 15% because of an absence of certain semiconductors and sensors. The Quad, of course, has taken upon itself to try and build supply chain resilience amongst India, Japan, Australia, and the US. But Dr. Kim, you've been talking about this, writing about this. Throw some light on what is the preferred way? What is the direction that countries can take to build greater resilience in supply chains so that they're not so dependent on one geography?
All right. Thank you very much, moderator. And also, I'd like to appreciate and thank you very much for the organizer for having me. I'm from South Korea, and I'm an economist. And I'm very happy to be one of the panelists in this very important session. And if we are thinking of the Indo-Pacific, I'd like to remind you that Indo-Pacific as a naming, the naming is important. It's named, according to the ocean or sea, not the continent or land, like the East Asia, Southeast Asia, or South Asia. So the Indo-Pacific, this concept cannot be thought without the thinking of some kind of the supply chain, because most of them now the 95%, more than 95% of all the trades is now conducted through the ocean. Okay, and then as moderator said that. After the pandemic, then we could observe the kind of disruptions in supply chain. And then not only if you think of the reason for why the kind of disruptions has occurred, the pandemic is not the only reason. Think of the case of the structural changes caused by the digitalization and then the combating against the climate change. So. There, in many countries in Indo-Pacific areas, we have a kind of the structural change in industries to change the industries less than let's use the parcel oil, parcel resources and others. All of this kind of can contribute to the disruption of the this kind of supply chain. And then everything that happened, I mean, after the pandemic, because the digitalization is accelerated after the pandemic. And then climate change, recently many people realized that climate change is very important, for combating the pandemic, something like that. So each nation state in Indo-Pacific, there are several kind of strategies to secure the supply chain. The first one, reshoring. I don't think that is successful. No. Okay, I mean, several very specific industries where we can observe some successful cases, but there is not just some general one. And then the second one is you call it nearshoring or the friendshoring, which was initiated by Ms. Gina Raimondo. Okay, so after 2 years of the observation, then we could very cautiously think that a kind of nearshoring, so-called China +1 or China +2, we have some kind of achievement. Okay, not only from the Korea but also other ASEAN and other countries, including the United States. And then this kind of the supply chain security would be strengthened in the future. And then, of course, that is not so sufficient, not so efficient ways of the value chain. But just forget the value chain, and you must think of the supply chain security. So that is one of the main objective of the trade policy now in all countries. In these areas, including the United States. And so, this is the strategy for the other countries except China. And then, we realized that most of the industries are heavily dependent on this upstream ingredient and elements from China, especially after the 2001. So this does not mean that China is blamed for every kind of the disruption. This means that if there is any kind of disruption in China caused by any reason, like a natural disaster or a pandemic, or some kind of the initiatives caused by the climate change, or other things by the Chinese government, something like that. So we need to diversify, although it's a little more costly. So that is now the strategy is now that we could see the kind of the successful cases we can see. And then I'd like to also talk about we have 3 panelists from the ASEAN countries, and then I'd like to really appreciate ASEAN's leadership, actually, and also ASEAN's leadership, actually, and initiatives to deal with the many non-conventional security issues, actually, in these areas. And then, as an economist from the South Korea, I'd very much like to talk about these issues and strengthen our cooperation with the ASEAN countries. And so to deal with, to solve or try to fix all these issues as well. And the last one is I'd like to talk about the United States. The pivot to Asia, you may think of pivot to Asia. And then, but my feeling is, my observation is that the America's approach to East Asia and then in Indo-Pacific areas, that's quite the strategy and the approach is time to time is changeable, and in a sense I'm capricious, right? And now we observe the Ukraine. So in that case, in East Asia, in Indo-Pacific areas, I'm not sure that what the United States is aiming, and then how about the initiatives by the Biden administration is just continue. Because one reason is, of course, Ukraine, but the other reason is that if you think of the IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, there is still the concept, okay, we understand the concept, but still obscure what the Biden administration implies. What is it?
Lisa, you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So,
yes,
still,
I think it's a valid question. I think that we had hoped when the Indo-Pacific strategy was released that the Indo-Pacific economic framework would also be laid out, but the fact is it wasn't. Whereas the strategy talked about how important trade relationships were, 1.75 trillion worth of trade happening, foreign direct investment of 969 billion in the region. So the case was made of why it's so important for the U.S. to be, economically engaged and, helping to, form the agendas, the trade agenda in the region. There was really no plan for how the U.S. would do that. So I do grant you that, and that's something that, we're waiting to hear from the Biden administration. Unfortunately, the question of the U.S. joining CPTPP has been caught up in our domestic politics, and it's become a problem for both the Republican and the Democratic parties because it's associated with the U.S. worker. And until we change the narrative and demonstrate that U.S. leadership in these global trade pacts is good for the U.S. worker, I think it's going to be very difficult for the United States to join CPTPP, although, hopefully that will change soon. So I agree with you on this point that the U.S. does need a stronger economic agenda. It's something that the administration has to step up and put forward. And one of the areas that it's looking possible to have perhaps some breakthroughs is on the digital trade. There seems to be large agreement within the region on digital trade issues and standards. So perhaps that's where we can start, is looking at digital trade and bringing the region together around a common vision of how digital trade should move forward in the future.
Just for the benefit of the audience, because when we talk about critical minerals and when we talk about rare earths, if India, for example, wants to make take a big step forward in electric mobility, where does most of the lithium comes from? Most of it comes from the processed material comes from China. And I think there's a genuine concern that if the US today can weaponize SWIFT, then the Chinese tomorrow could also weaponize lithium. And where do these wars then leave countries which have their own ambitions? Minister Marsudi, is this something that worries Indonesia, the supply chain dependence? Are you also working on establishing more resilience?
Yes, of course. I mean, the situation in one place will impact other places and impact all of us. For example, the situation in Ukraine. What we are always concerned is about the people, right? So we see the rising price of oil, energy, and then wheat, and then fertilizer, and then, of course, the disruption of supply chain. Then we found that who suffer a lot, that is developing countries and least developed countries. So what I would like to say is that, back to the Indo-Pacific, please let us work together to prevent the Indo-Pacific as a new theater of major power rivalries. That is number one. Number two, we have to take lesson learned from what is happening in Ukraine. One, please uphold the international law, including respect to the territorial integrity and sovereignty, consistently. I would like to underline consistently, not pick and choose. And then, please strengthen the culture of cooperation and inclusiveness. And then the third point and my last point, back to the Indo-Pacific. When you talk about Indo-Pacific, what is on our mind usually is about the security concern. But Ambassador, when you talk to Southeast Asian nation, what we want what the people want is prosperity. Not only the security is very important, but at the end, our people will ask, what is the meaning of developing a concept if it doesn't bring the economic benefit for the people? So that's why whenever we talk about Indo-Pacific, we should balance the security approach as well as the economic approach. And Lisa, when we talk about the economic approach, what we want is a more concrete cooperation on the economic. I mean, rules is very important, but at the end, again, the people will say, what is the benefit from us? Thank you.
Fair point. I need to open the floor for questions. Please raise your hands. I'll take a couple of questions at a time and make them short. And please, if there's a particular panelist that you want to direct them to, please say so. Gentleman over here.
I'm Guido Gianasso. I'm professor at HEC Paris here in Qatar and former associate dean at Nanyang Technological University. I have a question for Dr. Maliki. I'm an old friend of Singapore, but I would like to bring a little challenge to you right now. The countries of this region, and we're talking about prosperity here, more than security. The countries of this region, whether it's Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, are actually making have a strategy which is attracting foreign investments, and particularly foreign investments and talents from Europe. They offer great conditions, they offer permanent residency, they offer a number of attracting points. Singapore was a model for this part of the world until 3 years ago in terms of attracting the best and keeping it. Things have changed, right? And although the narrative of the government remains, we are open, the reality on the ground for all those who have lived in Singapore is very different.
Your question, please.
The question is, Minister, what is Singapore planning to do in order to continue to attract and retain talent, number one? And does the country realize that tens of thousands of senior experts who have left in not necessarily friendly terms are not helping the reputation of the country in the years to come? Thank you very much.
Okay, there was a, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm a former State Department official. Please, hi, I'm a former State Department official. I find it very interesting that the five panelists have not mentioned APEC, and I just wonder if somebody could address APEC. And to Minister, to your question about a focus on the economic side, and anyone can answer that question. Thank you.
Okay, let me hand it first to Dr. Maliki and then to Minister Marsudi.
Thank you so much for that question. I think many people are actually asking us the same very question. But let me first unequivocally say that Singapore is open. And we are open to investments, we're open to talents, we're open to inviting people who will be able to continue to contribute towards our collective vision of growth for Singapore. Yes, there's been some observation of late about the way Singapore particularly respond to our immigration policies with regards to foreign talents. And I think it's got a lot to do with, many people say that all politics are local, there are a lot of local issues that we're dealing with, and the COVID situation has not helped either. Because of the way we manage COVID, it's very different from different parts of the world. When I traveled to this part of the world last October, immediately after the situation got better in Singapore, and I wanted to find out more about the policies and the way Dubai, Qatar, Saudi Arabia respond to COVID. And many, even my own citizens are asking me, why are you not as open as the countries here? And the simple answer is that we're very different. Demographically, we're very different. Geographically, we're very different. And so we have to respond according to Singapore's context. And we were dealing with a situation in Singapore where the demographic profile is a lot more aging, and we need to protect our people, we need to protect lives, so responses were very different uniquely to Singapore. And there was a cost to it, of course. There was a cost to it, because expatriates were feeling that you are too restrictive. You can't travel, people can't come to Singapore. Look at Dubai, it's a lot easier for people to move to Dubai. We accept that. But because we had a clear understanding as where we want to go at that point in time, circumstances were very different. But we are opening up, and I think you would have read the recent announcement that from 1st of April, no more restrictions for travels. Everyone is most welcome to Singapore. And really, I think that the answer to your question is that we are open to foreign talents. We acknowledge that on our own, the population is just too small for us to sustain an economy that is open, and we remain open to investors all around. And do come to Singapore again and take a look at where we are as we open up, and we want to continue to engage not just people in the region, but also individuals from all over the world. Thank you.
I think we'll say alhamdulillah to that. Dr. Kim, you want to take the question on APEC?
Yes. Actually, I'm involved in some activities in APEC, and I think that the APEC is still useful to think about the regional issues. And then, as far as you know, the Thailand is now this year's hosting, and we are now preparing for the many initiatives. And then APEC is very important, providing the venues for discussing all of this kind of the regional issues. Thank you.
Minister? If I may add, well, if you talk about APEC, APEC is still very important forum. Why? First, because in terms of membership, it consists of developed and developing countries as well. And if you recall, actually APEC is the first forum that established an open up of economy with a certain timeline, but acknowledging the different capacity between developed and developed countries. So there is a principle of common but differentiated in APEC, which is we have to acknowledge that we are all different. We have different capacity between developed countries and developing countries. And then the third one is about the engagement between the government and the business people. So that's why in the APEC, there is the APEC Business Council. That is the very good forum where the private sector have the interaction with the government. So the government listen directly what is the concern from the business sector. So that is just additional information about APEC. Thank you, ma'am.
I know there were several other persons raising their hands, but I got a signal from the boss. One more question? Yes, sir. Oh, over here.
Thank you, and thank you all panelists for your very good and thoughtful inputs. I'm Colonel Joachim Isaacson from the UK MOD, and my question is security related, and all the time we are focusing on the competition between US and China, and then everything else seems to be small in between. But is that really the case? It's some really powerful middle powers in this region, and with lots of choices. And if I just use an example, if we could leave history behind and Korea and Japan could cooperate much closer, would be one of the strongest economies and military powers in their own right, and so on. So my question is, what role do we think middle powers will play in security in this region looking forward now?
Well, I'd been dying for somebody to talk about the concert of middle powers that is coming together. The Quad, of course, was an example of Australia, Japan, and India coming together with the US. But Dr. Kim, a tantalizing thought of Japan and Korea coming together?
Yes. Yes. And then, I mean, everything can change. And then we don't have to give up any possibility of the cooperation. And then I think that our future for the cooperation is very good, very bright, yeah. And then things change, and we are now searching for the commonness and the areas of cooperation, not only between the Korea and Japan, but also in these areas as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time. May I request the audience to give a big hand to our very erudite panelists. Thank you very much.